I'm sat today in Corpus Christi College in Oxford with Dr. Kate Tomas, who last time I spoke to, you were doing your doctoral research still, a couple of years ago. Since then, you've completed that project, submitted it, and obviously passed it. So, in completing that, where did that kind of research take you? What were your, put it this way, findings?
So the thesis was on the way in which the Catholic Church dealt with or engaged with mystics, particularly female mystics.
Yeah.
And I was trying to identify a particular pattern of treatment, which I did. So I suppose the findings were that there is not very much difference between the way in which people who claim to be in communication with God are treated now from 500 or 600 years ago.
And when you say people how they're treated, is that treated by the church predominantly?
So treated by specifically the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which is a department of the Vatican.
Yeah.
So we're talking, I focused particularly on the Roman Catholic Church, and so yes, there's a sort of ongoing problem, I suppose, within the church of, you know, how does the church deal with people who claim really to circumnavigate the authority of the church? Because if you claim that you're speaking to God or you're in dialogue with the divine, then, you know, why do you need to have priests?
The entire infrastructure of the
precisely.
institution.
There's no need for that.
So, you said that kind of treatment that they receive is largely, in many ways, unchanged. What kind of tends to characterise that treatment? Is it kind of not believing them or seeking to undermine them, or how's that kind of tend to?
Yeah, both of those things, I suppose. So, to some extent, it makes perfect sense that if you're an institution and your main, I suppose, priority is to maintain control and power over, your institution. And so with the Catholic Church, it's no different. So there are particular rules or particular teachings that the church has, and they're very concerned with protecting those. And so when you have somebody that comes along and says, actually, I've got it on higher authority that you're wrong about abortion, for example, because this is one of the women that I worked on, basically said that the dogmatic teachings on abortion that the church has are wrong, and that she heard this directly from Jesus. So when something like that happens, yes, immediately the first response is to sort of, I suppose, disenfranchise that person from knowledge. So to undermine them and sort of protect the church. So protect the teachings by ultimately the first round of this process is to say that they're speaking to the devil, not Jesus.
Okay, yeah.
So that's the first, most obvious way, instant way you can discredit somebody.
And I was thinking about this process you often get in numerous religions, where new revelation or new contact with the divine is seen as kind of dubious, false, and things, and yet historically it seems fine. So is there a sense in which mystics that at the time were discredited in this kind of way, and now look back on with a kind of fondness that they never received at the time?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is obviously like the classic example of this is Jesus, right? Because he was, in many ways, people have argued that he was a mystic of this sort who claimed to be communicating with God and was sort of anti-establishment at the time, and then of course later on we have this great acceptance of him. But yes, I mean, there's unsurprisingly, I suppose, two different types of mystics when it comes to the Catholic Church. So you have the contemporary people who claim to have communication or specifically dialogue with God, who are a threat, and so they have to be dealt with in a particular way. And then you have the mystics that are long dead. So 200, 300, 400, 500, 600-year-old mystics whose texts, so the writings that they have produced are used by the Catholic Church to support and shore up the dogma. So that's, I think, one of the things that I found particularly interesting was how are the texts of these people, particularly these women, used in different ways, considering the difference being time, really, because obviously you can't. It's very, very, very easy to appropriate the words of a dead woman, where it's absolutely not when you're trying to appropriate the words of somebody who can respond to you because they're alive.
No, I don't at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So that process, I mean, do you foresee, just as a kind of thing I've sort of wondered, do you see some of the people who are kind of currently being discredited that way, do you imagine in 50 years, 80 years, 100 years time, that they may well find themselves being admired and their works being kind of recognised in Catholicism, and yet in a way that they would themselves wouldn't recognise?
I don't know, actually. I think probably not, simply because we have such technology now, and I think it makes a big difference. So, you know, Teresa of Avila, when she was writing during the Spanish Inquisition, you know, the text that she has the text that she wrote and that we have are very easy to manipulate. Whereas if you've got somebody like Vasila Ryden, who's a contemporary mystic, she's on video all the time. She has, you know, audible podcasts. She has books. So it's going to be very much more difficult to manipulate her texts.
So they lay down a kind of architecture of kind of historical materials that makes that kind of
impossible.
And it's impossible. You might even think that the Catholic Church might have changed quite a bit in 50 years and not want to assimilate that in the same way.
I guess, I hope so. I mean, I don't know. Would that be good or bad? I don't know. Yes, you're right.
But certainly. So that was interesting. You found really, though, as your kind of ultimate find, was there no historical shift in that kind of treatment at all?
There is some. There is definitely different ways in which these people are discredited. And so, I mean, again, I suppose the shift is seen in the way in which the mystics are able to disseminate and communicate their message. So, for example, with Teresa, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith didn't have to have textual debates about the nature of the words that she was using, because she was dictating the texts through her spiritual advisors, who were members of the Catholic Church. So it was so highly edited just to get to that point. Whereas now, using Vasila Ryden as an example again, she writes herself these texts, and the first way that the Church tries to sort of discredit her is to take issue with the language that she uses.
So I guess she has a direct communication with an audience in a way that previous mystics had to have it mediated as well.
Exactly. So she's unmediated, whereas Teresa was heavily mediated.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Thank you.
You're welcome.